It's okay. We haven't forgot about you. Damn, you're dusty.
Welcome back to Project 380. In this video, I'm making a full front-to-back stainless 3-inch custom exhaust. So I'm finally back to working on the Mark II again, now that the body kit is sort of fitted and the Mark I is on the road. Now that means it's time to make a full exhaust system for this. Now sure, if I went with a G19 manifold or a Kraken manifold with a common TD04 turbo, I could have bought a complete exhaust system, but I wanted to challenge myself and make the whole system from scratch by myself. So I've been underneath the car and I've planned all the exhaust out and hopped on the internet to a company I do prefer to use for all my exhaust materials, such as bends, pie cuts and mufflers. And I've gone with Profusion exhausts. I could pretty much buy everything from this company. I've used them many times before and I really like their products. This is not sponsored, this is not an ad, I just really like their products. So at the minute I've got 2 boxes, a third will be on its way shortly, with a few things I forgot to order. Without further ado, let's cut this open and see what I've ordered. So in box number 1, I've got a 3-inch 4x9 offset muffler. By offset, that means it goes in the centre and slightly out to one side. This is a fairly similar size to the original one, but still a straight through flow. Hopefully this will quieten it down a fair bit, as I don't want it to be overly noisy. And in box number 2, I've got a weld on 4-inch flexi pipe. Now the MX5 doesn't actually come with a flexi section, but since the engine is pretty much solid mounted and the diff is solid mounted, I wanted the exhaust to have a little bit of flexibility and not rip the exhaust apart, so hopefully this will stop most of that. Then we've got a few 3-inch V-band clamps, a great big 90°, that'll come later, a load of 3-inch pie cuts, a 44mm 90°, and a load of 44mm pie cuts. Along with that, I ordered a few J-hooks from eBay, in other words stainless steel exhaust hangers, and from a car I polybushed a long time ago, I've actually got some polyurethane exhaust rubbers left over, so I'm going to use them. And a great huge length of 3-inch stainless and 44mm stainless. So a very long time ago, and I'm talking before I removed the engine out of the car, you may remember I actually started making the downpipe, and I've made from the turbo to just underneath the car. Now that's all just tacked together, that's not quite ready to be fully welded just yet, so I'm going to continue on with that downpipe and work my way from the front back.
So there's the downpipe I made many moons ago. I think I'm going to start off by plumbing the wastegate into the downpipe. I've already taken the V-band off, so I'm going to weld a bend straight to that V-band and take it from there. Before we even think about welding these two together, we need to make sure they're completely clean, nice and flat and free of burrs. Now that's not a problem for the V-band as it comes machined, so there shouldn't be any burrs on that. That just needs a little bit of a clean. And the pie cuts from Profusion already come nice and flat and free of burrs. Now to clean everything up before welding stainless, you want to use some pure acetone and a nice clean rag. Once they're nice and clean, you can assemble them together, and if you're happy they're in the right place, it's time to tack them together. With the V-band and the first pie cut tacked together, I can now go and add more pie cuts, straights and angles to join up with the downpipe. So the plan is to tack this all together and then fully weld it at the end. So I'm going to grab another pie cut, clean it all up and tack it onto this.
So with that all welded up, it's now time to mount it back onto the external wastegate and see how it lines up with the downpipe. I may have put on too much pipe. Just kidding, this was the plan all along. And if you remember, back when I had this bonnet wrapped, I asked you whether I had missed anything, and of course, it was this hole for the external wastegate. I've got it sitting pretty nice, only just poking up out of the bonnet, and I think it looks quite subtle, but my plan is to make a little surround on this bonnet cutout that looks very similar to these bonnet vents. So this is what is known as a screamer pipe. Yes, this was the plan all along. I've always wanted a screamer pipe. Not exactly the most legal thing, but we'll worry about that in a little while. So how this works is the external wastegate opens up and redirects some of the exhaust gases before the turbo out of the external wastegate. In my case, out of a screamer pipe. So when you've reached your desired boost level, external wastegate opens up and the exhaust gases come out the screamer pipe and out the bonnet, and that's when we get some beautiful flames. Now, instead of a screamer pipe, obviously there is always the option to reroute this straight into the downpipe. This is something I'm going to do in the near future. I know a screamer pipe isn't exactly track friendly due to the excessive noise it makes. And obviously out on the general road, you are releasing exhaust gases before the catalytic converter. So what I'm going to do is make a second downpipe in the near future with a small bellow here in between the downpipe and the external wastegate, getting rid of the screamer pipe completely. And then I've got the option to change between a screamer pipe or a sensible pipe. But what I've got to do now, since I've only just tacked this all together, is take this off, clean it up and get it all welded together. Now all along this screamer pipe, all I've done is put 2 tacks on each joint. To minimize warping and movement with the heat, what I'm going to do is put an extra 2 tacks on each joint first. Now I'm going to let that cool down a little bit, refit it back on the car and make sure it hasn't moved too much. Because now is the time to make all the adjustments before it's fully welded. Yep, that's still sitting pretty good. I'm happy with that and I'm ready to continue welding. Now before I fully weld this, I want to clean this up as much as possible. So I'm just going to take a little brush and go over my tacks, making sure I'm cleaning off any oxide and then wipe this all down with some more acetone. So that's as clean as I could get it, and I've taped up both ends with some aluminium tape and any large gaps I had. So in one end, I've got a line going in with argon, and the other is blanked off with the aluminium tape with a couple of holes in it. So what this is going to allow it to do is fill the pipe with argon, flush out any gas we don't want inside the pipe, and this is in the hope to stop something called sugaring on the inside of the pipe. This is basically a layer of oxidization, which we really don't want there. This is more commonly used in exhaust manifolds, but you know me, I do like to go a little bit overkill. So I'm going to start the argon flowing into the pipe, leave that running for a few minutes, and that is going to back purge all the gases out that we don't want. And then it's finally time to start welding this up. Now with all that welded up, I'm going to leave it to cool for a little while, pop some gloves on, rub it down with some acetone and install it onto the car. All back on the car now, and that is looking pretty good. I'm really happy with the outcome. I'm toying with the idea of making a small brace from the screamer pipe to the downpipe, just for a bit of extra support. There is a little bit of weight to this, but not too much, but it is all hanging off that external wastegate.
And the last thing I want to do is snap the manifold. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. But now it's onto the downpipe. If you remember from a long time ago, all I've done is put a 90 down to a couple of angles and it finishes about there somewhere. So I'm going to jack the car up a little bit more for a bit of extra room and finish off this downpipe. So this is where I ended up the downpipe last time, right near the gearbox, and now I need to get it all the way to the diff. Now this has got a little bit of an angle to it. I'll show you from a different perspective so you can see. So as you can see, it's pointing slightly down. So I think I'm going to have to put a pie cut right on the end there and then the flexi joint. Okay, I've run into a slight issue. This flexi is not going through this access hole whatsoever. So I think I'm going to have to rethink this, maybe put this on the next section along. So after a few hours of frustration, I worked out that the flexi just wasn't going to go down that hole whatsoever. And my only option really is to weld a V-band right on the end here. If I put another angle then the V-band, it still won't go down into that hole. So to change the angle of the exhaust, it's going to have to go this side of the V-band. So I'm going to get this V-band clamp tacked onto this downpipe and test fit it again in the car. Let's go give that a try. Now a quick check underneath. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to take the whole downpipe off and fully weld it now. I'm going to fully weld this as this is the base of the whole exhaust. And because of the heat that I'm going to put in it, it may warp a little bit, which may affect me making the rest of the exhaust. So let's rip it off and fully weld it. I've got the downpipe on my workbench and I've welded up the inside of this flange where it meets the pipe, hopefully making a nice smooth exit for the exhaust gases. Obviously I couldn't back purge that, but now for the rest of the pipe I am going to back purge it. So I'm going to seal that end up with some aluminium tape and put my argon straight in this end. That's the downpipe fully welded. I'm pretty happy with how it came out. I fused most of it rather than using filler rod. I did go a little bit hot in some places. I'm pretty happy with how the top flange came out though. And I completely forgot to say, when you are welding a V-band, try and have the other section of the V-band and the clamp attached. This is going to help reduce the warping in the V-band, ensuring that the V-band stays sealed. Now, this isn't quite finished just yet, but I'm going to let this cool down and install it back on the car. Now, what I wanted to do was make a little bracket to connect the downpipe to the gearbox down there like it originally had from the factory. It used to be a triangle shaped plate that bolted onto the gearbox, which then bolted to a clamp round the downpipe. Now I can't find that triangle bracket whatsoever, so this will have to come in the near future. But now onto the last bit of the downpipe. If anyone does know where I could buy this little triangle bracket from, please leave it down in the comments below. Or even better, if you have a spare and are willing to send it to me or sell it to me, please DM me on Instagram. To finish off the downpipe, I need to put in an O2 sensor. An O2 sensor measures the unburnt fuel and oxygen coming out of the exhaust. It measures how rich or how lean the exhaust gases are. And then in turn, the ECU controls how much fuel to give the car. The MX5s as standard came out of the factory with something called a narrowband O2 sensor, which is basically an on-off switch. It either measures rich or lean. And for something that's turbocharged or supercharged, That's really not ideal. So that's where something called a wideband O2 sensor comes into play. A wideband sensor, instead of measuring rich or lean, it actually measures a scope in between the two with a set of values. This is going to help dial in exactly how much fuel the ECU is going to send to the engine. So I've purchased myself an AEM Series X wideband from Boffy Racing. This is absolutely ideal for a turbo setup with a standalone ECU. In the box you get a nice snazzy AEM air fuel ratio gauge, which is actually a controller as well. Of course the wideband O2 sensor itself, all the necessary wiring, and this is something I didn't realise actually came in the kit, but a stainless steel weld-on bung. The wiring side of this is definitely for a future video, but today we're just concentrating on the exhaust and the O2 sensor itself. Now the placement of this wideband sensor is quite critical. In an NA setup, this isn't too bad. You could put it pretty much in the manifold, but on a turbo it is a bit different. So my downpipe, the turbo would sit here, and you don't want the O2 sensor too close to the turbo as it can get heat soaked and give you a false reading. You don't want it too close to the back box as it can read a bit of fresh air on idle and off throttle. So ideally we want it about a metre away from the turbo, but because I still want it in the downpipe, I think it's going to have to go about here somewhere. Now believe it or not, the angle of how you put the wideband into the pipe will affect it and may cause the wideband sensor to fail early. If you put the sensor in a downward position, condensation may form on it, causing the sensor to fail, and the same in the vertical position. Condensation can form on the top and go straight to the tip of the sensor. So ideally, we need to be 10 degrees away from the center or 15 degrees up above the horizontal. So I'm going to reinstall the downpipe onto the car and see where I could put the sensor, hopefully somewhere about here. So looking at the downpipe from underneath, it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to put it on this side of the exhaust as it's going to hit the transmission tunnel. I can't put it too far over this way as it's going to hit the transmission, so I'm going to have to put it directly on top at a slight angle. But at least that's going to give me enough room to service the O2 sensor and remove it without removing the downpipe. So I'm going to have a quick play around with positions, mark the downpipe up and take the downpipe off yet again. The downpipe's back off the car. I marked it while it was underneath the car, and I've just put a little dot punch there to stop my drill wandering off to the side. Now this actually needs to be a 22mm hole. I definitely don't have a 22mm drill, so I'm going to go in with a series of drills and then probably use a die grinder and a burr to make this hole the right size. Every step of the way, checking that weld-in bung for fitment. Well, my drill died, so I took this to work and drilled it out. I drilled it to about 12mm and then took the rest out with a burr on a die grinder. Now we're ready for the O2 bung. Even though the AEM wideband did come with an O2 weld-on bung, I didn't realise, and I've bought this one from Profusion exhaust, and for one simple reason. This came with a bung insert, which is simply a bolt with the right thread pattern to insert into this weld-on bung. This is really going to help me when I weld this on. The threads really don't like the heat, and the bung itself can distort with a bit of heat. So if we put this into the bung while we weld it up, it should keep the threads nice and neat, keep the bung round, and because I'm going to be back purging this as well, it's going to keep all the argon inside the exhaust rather than rushing out the O2 bung hole. So I'm going to clean everything up with a little bit of acetone, pop my O2 bung in, which is a nice snug fit, clamp her down and weld her up. Now I'm going to let that completely cool down before I remove that bolt. If I remove it while it's too hot, I can cause damage to those threads. So I'm going to leave it 10-15 minutes and install the downpipe back onto the car. So a quick look underneath. I haven't put the sensor in just yet, but you can see there's plenty of room for it here. So that's the downpipe on for hopefully the last time. It's just held on with 2 studs and 2 nuts for now. They're just some standard manifold studs with some brass nuts. I think in the future, so I don't have any of the nuts back off and the downpipe falls off, I would like to change to a higher grade stud and maybe some Nordlock washers or Nordlock nuts. Let me know down in the comments below what you've had your best experiences with and what you've found works or doesn't work, because I'm not putting too much confidence in this at the minute, but it's it's ideal for me to get the downpipe mounted and the rest of the exhaust made. Now on to making the mid pipe. So the part I'm now going to make is the mid section from the diff all the way to the rear subframe. It is a relatively straight bit of pipe, and I'm going to take advantage of this and make modular sections. By that I mean I'm going to make 2 if not 3 sections that are completely interchangeable. So the first modular section I am going to make is going to include a V-band, a flexi and a cat with another V-band at the end, made out of completely straight pipe of a known length. And because it's a known length, I could take another piece of pipe exactly the same length and just swap them out. And of course the second pipe I'm going to make is just going to be a V-band, a flexi and just pipe. We'll call that the naughty pipe. And the third section, if I do need to make it, is going to include a resonator or a silencer. Obviously, all depending how the car sounds. I don't want it too raspy, but that will come in the future once the car's started and I know what it sounds like. But to start things off, I'm going to make the cat pipe. The mid pipe with cat and flexi is all welded up, and I'm really happy with how this came out. Now we all know this isn't going to stay in for long, so I made this to an exact known length, so I can easily change it out for the naughty pipe, also known as the D-cat pipe. So I've stood both the mid pipes on the floor, and they are dead on level with each other, and I've tested them both to fit and they fit exactly. So all depending on what I need at the time, I can either have the cat in or the naughty pipe or a third section that I'm going to make at a later date. So now these are made, I'm going to whack one of these in and start on the next section of the exhaust. Well, that's the D-cat with flexi installed, and it's not hanging too low. It's sagging a bit this end because of the flex in the flexi. So I'm going to prop this up a bit to take the weight off and then plan the rest of the exhaust. I'm thinking from the end of the D-cat I may have to make another centre section that joins just behind the diff. So going all the way from here, and then a slight little bend over top of the strut bar, and then into another V-band, and then to the back box. Yes, I know it's another joint, but I think this is going to be better for serviceability. So in other words, I don't have to take off the whole rear section of the exhaust just to undo a drive shaft bolt. All I've got to do is slip out this section here. So I'm going to plan this out and then start making it. that's the centre section all done. I'm pretty happy with most of it. I will admit I didn't back purge this as I'm running really low on gas. So I'm going to put this back in the car and double check all the fitment and get straight onto the back box. That's the centre section all hung up. I'm not going to lie, it's really tight coming through the subframe and the diff. I gave it a good wiggle and it doesn't seem to be hitting anything. So now time for the back box. So I think off of camera, I'm going to use a couple of axle stands to lift the back box up and then have a play around with some pipe that goes from the centre section to the back box. So I've got the back box sat on a trolley jack. I've got it nice and high in the back box recess, slightly above this jacking point, so I know if I reverse and hit anything, it's going to hit the jack point first before any of the exhaust. Because this is in such the perfect position, I think I'm going to tack this on the car, because I know even though I may mark this with a Sharpie and take it off, it may not be in the right position. So I'm going to tack it up before it moves. So that's the back box all done. I done it all off of camera as it was quite tricky to weld. I had some really tight spaces around here and honestly you wouldn't have seen much. I may have gone slightly overkill with all the exhaust hangers, but I really didn't want this to move and flex when it was on the car because I can hit the diff. And you may have noticed on this end I have put a V-band, and that's for a good reason. I now want to make an interchangeable exhaust tip. First reason is so I could change what style exhaust tip I have, and two, if I'm doing backwards entries, the exhaust tip is probably going to be the first thing to be hit, and if that's damaged I could just disconnect it from the back box here and change it to a different one. So I'm going to get this back in the car and start making my exhaust tip. That's the V-band welded to a 90-degree bend, and it comes pretty much to the end of the bumper. So I think to finish this one off, I'm going to put a couple of pie cuts on the end and do a little turn down. Now I haven't got quite enough pie cuts to finish this off, but ideally I want the car on the floor, and then I'll add more pie cuts if I want to. So I'm going to weld these straight on the end here, and I'm actually going to back purge this so it's a bit more aesthetically pleasing. So that's the final part of the exhaust made. I'm really happy with how this came out. Now before I put this on, make sure you give the tip a good clean. No one likes a dirty tip. So it's sitting really nice in the bumper. I maybe could have used a slightly wider diameter exhaust here to really fill out this recess. But the last thing I wanted was for the exhaust to knock on the bumper and create a horrible noise. But I think with the little turn down, it's going to really match this bumper nicely. Maybe just one more pie cut on the end. So that is a full custom stainless steel exhaust made from front to back with a modular center section and an interchangeable tip. Now I really can't wait to hear what this sounds like and the sound difference in the modular mid sections. And I really can't wait for that screamer pipe to open and shoot some flames. Now in the past I've made little sections of stainless exhaust, but I've never taken on this huge task of making a full front to back exhaust. So let us know how I done in the comments below and if I could do anything better. But that's all for now, so like, comment and subscribe, and thank you for watching.